My speech didn't start off as courage. I always thought of courage as something that belonged only to the heroes of our society. Great athletes, people who climb Mount Everest and achieve great tasks. It was something I heard in the celebrations of other people, and so basically it had nothing to do with me. And for the most part, I was fine with this. I mean, what Achillean task is a high schooler like me accomplishing that requires that heroic, fearless, gallant thing people call courage? But then, just over 2 months ago, on January 31st, my parents sat me down after a day of school, and they told me that my dog, who I've grown up for the past 5 years, Maddie, has suddenly died. And in an instant, my whole world changed. What followed that day to the following weeks that lead me to where I am now challenged my social and my physical and emotional self like nothing I've ever experienced before. And that word, courage, took on a whole new meaning for me. My dad didn't even need to finish his first sentence before my head were to my knees, and my hands were trembling and masking my eyes as I drowned them in tears. My throat thickened and my chest grew tight as I tried to catch my breath between the tsunamic waves of emotions that I never even knew existed. I screamed and I wailed, and whatever sound you call it, as if the louder I was, the more I could push away what had happened from being true. But tsunamis don't wait for you to find shelter. They're merciless and they're brutal. And so the waves, they just kept coming. I'm not sure how long I stayed there, shrunken, because I was feeling the world I lived in for the past 5 years be flooded and be ravaged. Crashed were all my buildings of familiarity and of safety. Uprooted were all my forests of normality. And buried were all my highways and roads of daily routine. Swept were they all into this massive amalgamation of pain and sorrow. And that night, when I looked into the mirror, I didn't even recognize myself through eyes burnt from the tears that erupted from them, and through a face swollen like I just got out of a fist fight. Lying in bed, memories and questions filled my head. I lay scrunched up with my knees to my chest, because stretching my legs out was what I did before to feel the warmth of fur with my toes where she used to lay. And now that no longer existed. But how? She was normal this morning. What if I was there for her? Maybe the seizures would have stopped. If only I got a chance to say goodbye. If only the doctors tried a little bit harder. Every morning after that, I woke up to a battle. A battle between getting out of bed and entering a world where people actually exist, and what always seemed like the much easier option, staying in bed. My world was washed away and I was left with nothing but broken and fallen debris. And so life, it felt like a merry-go-round. It's constantly spinning and it's constantly moving. But now I was on this ride expecting to feel the same way everyone else around me was experiencing. But my merry-go-round, it was broken. I was stuck. And so like a movie, I watched as life and I watched as everyone else in it continued to move on, had the sheer audacity to continue to move on without me, as if my world didn't just shatter. I tried to grab on to the tail of time. I tried to grab on even to the bits of dust left behind, trailing behind the people and moments passing by. Wait for me. Give me a second to get back to normal and I'll be right back with you. My voice yelling, but my body paralyzed. Forgotten was how I felt from a world that now was too scary to re-enter. What do I do? What now? And there was one day where this battle was the hardest. I had just finished a test, not really finished because I handed in half empty. And as I stepped out of the classroom, a tear rolled down my cheek. And then another, silently, sneakingly. As if I was saying goodbye to a fragmentation of myself, a sliver of my identity capsulated in that teardrop as they too rolled away from me. I've never been in a position like this before. I felt as if my skin has been ripped off of my body. I was exposed. Now I knew, like this, I would have to go on to my next class and tell my next teacher I didn't finish a project all my other classmates were well done with. And the first thing that went through my head was, I got to get the hell out of here, because there was no way I was walking into a classroom like this. Eyes brimful of terror. Hands empty of work, and hair. God, then there was my hair. I was scared to show this version of myself. Why? It was because I ran into this thing called shame. If other people knew this version of me, would I still be worthy of connection? Because this version of me wouldn't be able to conjure up a smile to hide behind. I wouldn't be able to hold up good work that would speak for myself. It would just be the raw me. It would just be me. And the next thing I did, I think I will remember for the rest of my life, because it really did change me. I walked into the classroom door. Simple, right? Well, I can tell you it was damn hard, because I could feel this energy inside of me, this energy digging deep inside myself, past self-defeating thoughts, past a voice in my head that said, no one will like this weak version of you, and past shame, and buried beneath it all, I found something. Dirt in my fingernails, I pick it up. There it was. That's it. Courage. It was old and it was rusty, like it had always been there, but just never discovered before, but I found it. And I chose it. And so I walked into the classroom door. And yes, everyone saw my swollen eyes and my messy hair. And yes, I was afraid. And yes, I was vulnerable. And yes, I was courageous. Because I think the honesty that I showed spoke so much more about me than if I was to pick and choose the moments that I let myself be seen, be the moments that had a smile on my face and that I was happy. And so that was the start. Every morning from that day on, I consciously chose courage. And it was not gallant, and it was not heroic, and it was definitely not fearless. It was showing up. It was showing up to school, it was showing up for my friends and my family, and it was showing up for myself. It was letting myself grieve. And it was being kind and patient to myself. And slowly, I swam through the debris. I rebuilt my buildings, and I replanted my forest. And I reorientated every part of my physical and emotional world. It was walking into that classroom door, because the moment I did that, courage had everything to do with me. I'm here now, aren't I? And after all of this, I've been able to step out. And I've been able to see this me, this version, this Angelina as I talk and as I interact and as I do things in the world. And I started to ask questions. I started to think, why did I do things the way I did? Why did I understand things the way I did? And why did my relationship with this word, courage, this word that I wouldn't even think twice about just 2 months ago, change so dramatically? This is because I now saw this word, courage, through the lens of another word, vulnerability. And so researcher and storyteller Dr. Brené Brown, she defines vulnerability as the willingness to show up to something when you can't control the outcome. It's the emotion you experience during uncertainty, during risk, and during emotional exposure. Now, can you please raise your hand if you experienced or have you witnessed an act of courage that did not involve risk, that did not involve emotional exposure, that did not involve uncertainty? No. Because there is no courage without vulnerability. There is no courage without vulnerability. And so this totally smashed this idea I had about vulnerability. It totally scattered the puzzles of this picture I already painted about it. And it shattered the myth that has wrapped around this masquerade of vulnerability everyone around me has believed. Because we all think it's oversharing, that it's a sign of weakness, while in fact, I think vulnerability is the greatest measure of courage. And then I realized, we, like the entire human society, we've evolved to wear this armor around our body. And the very purpose of this armor is to protect us from vulnerability. It's to minimize the painful feeling judgment and shame has on us when we open ourselves to other people. And everyone has an armor. And it just comes in different forms. And for me, my armor was perfectionism. I thought that if I was able to live perfectly, look perfectly, study perfectly, and do everything perfectly, I would never be in a situation of fear, of setback, of disappointment. And I would never need to use that thing called courage. But what I realized is that disappointment, failure, and setback is inevitable in life, and that I was no exception to this, and neither are you. And by keeping on this armor, we are self-protecting ourselves in a way that keeps us small. It prevents us from growing into our own gifts. So, what if we took off this armor? Yes, we would be poked, and we would be scratched, and we would fall, but then we would finally be able to learn how to get back up. And so the next time you fall, you'll be able to get back up even better, and you'll do it again and again, and you'll get better and better, because the ability to get back up after you fall can be practiced, and it can be improved. The ability to show courage can be practiced, and it can be improved. Dr. Brown uses this really cool example that allows us to understand this concept. Can you imagine if you physically fell and you didn't know how to get back up? So you spend your whole life tiptoeing on the ground, and you'll have your hand bracing the roof of a car as you feel your way into the door, and as you grab onto the handle and try to squiggle yourself into the seat. You'll never let go and just walk. Because your biggest fear is that if I fall, I don't know how to pick myself back up. Luckily, this isn't really the case in real life. We are not tiptoeing on the ground, but that's because we've physically fallen so many times before, and each time we picked ourselves back up. We've practiced this, and we've improved. And the same thing is true in the world of our mind. If we never take off our armor, if we never let our vulnerable self be seen, if we never learn how to rise, we will never take a leap. And I'd like to share with you 2 ways in which you can do this wherever you are in your life, and where you can choose courage. The first is that you can replace this armor with something that will actually help you, which is an insatiable curiosity. Because the moment I stepped back and I started to ask questions about the world around me, about the people in it, and about myself, the moment I realized that topics like these are real. And that topics like these aren't just words still in life, and that they can be discussed, and that they can be experimented with, and that they can be written about in a TED Talk. And it takes courage to challenge the things that are already comfortable in life. And it takes courage to want to know more. And secondly, you can become your own editor of the story you tell yourself about the things that happen around you. You see, when we experience failure, disappointment, or setback, our brain is hardwired for one thing, and that's survival. And so our brain craves a narrative pattern with a beginning, a middle, and an end, so that we can explain the reasoning of why this bad thing has just happened. And it's very necessary and helpful for our brain to read stories, Because afterwards, it gives us an award. It gives us a calm, I understand what's happening around me award. But the thing is, our brain gives us this award no matter how accurate the story we tell it. And so, you're talking to your friends, right? And you're talking about music, and you make a comment, and you're going like, oh, I actually think the Beatles are really overrated. And it passes your head, and after the conversation is over and all your friends leave, you realize one of your friends is absolutely obsessed with the Beatles. And I mean obsessed with the Beatles. And you start to replay the conversation in your head. She seemed pretty distant, no? I mean, at the end, she wouldn't even look at me when we said bye. And you'd start to tell a story. Oh my gosh, it's because of what I said. Oh my gosh, she's never going to talk to me again. And so you double up on your armor, and you decide that you're never going to criticize music ever again. Do you see where I'm going here? So what if we challenged this narrative we told ourselves? What if we went to this person and we went like, oh man, I'm really sorry I said that thing about the Beatles. And then she says, oh, what? I didn't even realize. I just wanted to leave so I could be first at the lunch line. The stories we make up and our ability to reality check them completely determines our level of balance and resilience. So what's the story you're telling yourself? Are you even aware of them? Are you brave enough to find out? And so from all of this, I think I've become a bouncier person. I'm able to bounce back up better when I fall. But this doesn't mean I still don't fall. This doesn't mean I still don't get sad. And this doesn't mean I still don't miss Maddie. You know, I still think of her all the time. Some nights before I go to bed and my hands are on the light switch, I still open my mouth to call her name to tell her it's time for bed. And I'm waiting to hear the click-clacking of her paws on the ground, and I'm waiting for her to come trot to me. You know, when I drop something at home, the first thing I still do is freeze. And I'm looking for her because I know these are the sounds that frighten her the most. And when I see a plate of ribs left over, the first thing I think of is, I know who would love that. And I still have left over dog treats that we never got to finish, and I still have white fur on the clothes that I wear. I realize that I will always carry Maddie in my heart, and I will never get over her, and neither do I ever want to. Before, I couldn't even see photos of her on my phone, because the story I was telling myself was, this is so unfair. Why is life so evil? And my life is never going to be the same again. But now I've reshaped this story. When I see pictures of her, I smile. And I think, how lucky am I to have had those years with her? I am so grateful to have grown up with a sister. And I feel warmth. And with each happy memory of Maddie, the warmth grows. And I know the warmth won't replace the sadness, but I know the warmth and the sadness will find a way to sit beside each other. I always thought of courage as belonging only to the heroes in our society, to great athletes and to people who climb Mount Everest and achieve great tasks. And yeah, they do have courage, but so do you, and so do I. And because I realize courage is as simple as showing up. It's believing that what makes you vulnerable makes you beautiful. It's the willingness to step into something when there's no guarantee, because it is there that is the birthplace of creativity, of joy, of connection, and of love. But most of all, it is to have our eyes open to the enormous opportunity we have in our lives every day, to continue to stumble and to continue to get back up again. Thank you.